Hi, today our video is going to be about nucleic acids. And nucleic acids is one of the four main biomolecules that we've been learning about. And so the title of our notes is going to be nucleic acids. Okay, and today I am going to be focusing on two examples, okay? The first example is going to be DNA. And I'm sure most of you have heard of DNA before. And maybe you know what DNA actually stands for. Maybe you don't, but it stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, so that's kind of a long name. So it's good that we shorten it to DNA. And so all nucleic acids are made of monomers, so pieces. And the pieces for nucleic acids are called nucleotides. So nucleotides are what nucleic acids are made of. Okay, and so we are going to draw and describe a DNA nucleotide. Okay, a DNA nucleotide is made of three parts. First part is called a phosphate group. And as I list them, I'm going to draw them so you can see. And so I'm going to draw the phosphate group. I'm going to draw each part a different color. And so just for the sake of keeping things simple, I'm going to just draw a P for phosphorus, and I'm just going to draw a circle around it. But just so you know that this phosphate group has oxygens and hydrogens also. I'm not drawing them for the sake of the drawing, but just so you know, there's oxygens attached. And I will show you a molecular structure picture from your book in a second. So that's the first group, is you have a phosphate group. And then the second part of a nucleotide is a sugar. And for DNA, the sugar is called deoxyribose. Okay? And that's where the name deoxyribose comes from, is from the sugar. And so I'm going to draw the sugar. The sugar has 5 carbons in it. And so I'm going to draw it in orange. So here is 1 carbon here, okay? These lines represent the chemical bonds in between the different groups. This is 1 carbon. And then the sugar has this I like to think of it as like a house shape, but it's got 5, it's like a pentagon, okay? Each corner represents a carbon. Each carbon is also attached to oxygens and hydrogens, okay? And so this is what the deoxyribose sugar looks like. The phosphate group is always bound to this carbon right here. And I'm going to number these carbons so that we can just put some labels on here. So this carbon is always labeled number 1. Oops. Oh my goodness. Sorry. Okay, let me redraw this house. This is a deoxyribose sugar. This carbon is number 1. This carbon here is number 2. This carbon here is number 3. This carbon here is number 4. And this carbon here is number 5. Okay? And so we're putting some labels on there so we have like an orientation for the nucleotide. And so the phosphate group is always attached to carbon number 5. Okay, and then the last part of the nucleotide is called a nitrogenous base. And in DNA, there are 4 options for the nitrogenous base. The first option is called, and in no particular order, and we're just going to call the first one A, and that stands for adenine. And the second one is C, that stands for cytosine. The third one is G, that stands for guanine. And the last one is T, and that stands for thymine. Okay, so those are the 4 options. Okay. G is for guanine, it's spelled like that. Those are the 4 options. And the nitrogenous base is always attached to carbon number 1 in the deoxyribose sugar. So it's on this carbon. I'm going to make a bond there, and I'm just going to designate this A for adenine for now. But it could be any one of those 4. So that's what a nucleotide looks like for DNA. And so let me show you a picture from the textbook. Of what a nucleotide looks like. And so here are the 3 parts that we just went over. Here's the phosphate group, and I just drew it as a P with a circle around it, but really it has these oxygens and hydrogens attached. This is the deoxyribose sugar, and then this is the nitrogenous base, okay? And I'm just labeling them A, C, G, or T, but they actually have a chemical structure that looks like this. Okay, and so as in all the biomolecules, each monomer can be attached to another monomer and another monomer and another monomer, and all the pieces can be attached to each other to make the polymer, okay? So in all these biomolecules, you just have these repeating pieces that are attached to each other one after another to make the large molecule. So a large molecule of DNA is made up of many nucleotides attached to each other. And this is how they attach to each other. So I'm just going to draw one nucleotide here. I'm going to draw each nucleotide a different color. And so this is one nucleotide, has a phosphate group, and then it's attached to a sugar. And then that has a nitrogenous base, which I'm just going to say is A for this one again. And so let me scoot this up a little bit. I'm going to redraw this because I don't like it. I drew it too fast and it wasn't very good. Oh, no. Let's put the O there. And then I'm going to draw the little house. Better. Okay, good. And then here's the A. Okay, so this is one nucleotide. And because this is the 5th carbon, we say that this is the top of the nucleotide, and we call that 5'. And the 5' means like the top, like the head. And then because this is the 3rd carbon, we say that the bottom is 3'. So the top of a nucleotide, the head is 5'. The bottom of the nucleotide, the feet are 3'. And that is only based on these carbons. This is the 5th carbon here, and this is the 3rd carbon here. So there's always a top and a bottom. So whenever you add a nucleotide, you always add it on the 3' carbon. So the next nucleotide, I'm going to add the phosphate group. Here's the phosphate group to the next nucleotide. And that's going to be bound to the 3' carbon of the nucleotide above it. And then the phosphate group is going to be attached to its deoxyribose sugar. And then it has a nitrogenous base, and I'm just going to say it's C for this one, cytosine. Okay, and then I'm going to add another nucleotide. And so here's a phosphate group. And this is attached to the 3' of the sugar in front of it. I want to make this circle smaller. Okay, and this phosphate group, hang on. I'm going to say this is attached to the 3' of that nucleotide, and then this phosphate group is attached to the deoxyribose sugar. And this one has a nitrogenous base. I'm just going to make it G. Okay, I'm just picking arbitrary ones. So now we've got 3 monomers in a row, and this is building up a big DNA. In your cells, you have 3 billion nucleotides. So that's a lot. And so this is just 3. And so this is the top, which is the 5', and this is the bottom, which is the 3'. Okay, each nucleotide has a top and a bottom, and each strand has a top and a bottom. And so the thing about DNA is that it's double-stranded. So when you think of DNA in your mind, a lot of times you think of this twisty ladder. Okay, so it looks like this. And what I just drew was half of the ladder. Okay, so let's see, I'm going to go like this. So I'm going to draw this half of the ladder goes like this. And then the other half, the complementary side, goes like this. Okay, and then it's going to bind to the other side. Okay, so that's what a DNA looks like. It's a twisty ladder. It's got two sides. Okay, right here, what I've drawn is just one side of the ladder. These nitrogenous bases, they represent the rungs of the ladder, but only half of the rung. So I'm going to go ahead and draw the complementary side right now. Let me just move this out of the way here. Okay, so we have this nucleotide here. And a couple of things that you need to know is that we're going to write this down. A always binds with T and C always binds with G. Okay, you need to know this. So DNA has bases that bond to each other. And so A, adenine, always binds to T, thymine, and C always binds to G. Okay, so adenine always binds with thymine, cytosine always binds with guanine. Okay, you have to remember that. The other thing I want to add here is that DNA is a double helix, and it is called like anti-parallel. Anti-parallel. Okay. And so a helix because it's a twisty molecule, and double because it's double stranded. Okay, so we have our one side of the DNA molecule here. I'm going to draw the second side. Okay, so I'm going to use different colors for each nucleotide. So this A always binds with T. So I'm going to put a T here, and I'm putting it upside down. That's why it's called anti-parallel, because they run parallel to each other, but one goes up and down in this direction and the other one is upside down. So they're anti-parallel to each other. And so this is going to be an upside down strand. And so this T is upside down, and this binds to a deoxyribose sugar, and I'm drawing it upside down. And then this is bound to the phosphate group, which I'm drawing upside down. Here's the P and the circle. So there's our nucleotide. And so this is the complementary strand. And this nucleotide is upside down, so the 3' end is here. Okay? So let's draw the next one. Let's see, let's do brown. So the C binds always to G. So I'm drawing a G here upside down, and that's bound to the deoxyribose sugar. And that's bound to the phosphate group. Okay, and this phosphate group always binds to the 3' end of the nucleotide above it. So there's another nucleotide. And then let's add our last one. And so what color have we not done? Red. So this G binds with C. So here's the upside down C, bound to the first carbon in the deoxyribose sugar. And then here is the phosphate group. Okay, my picture is getting a little wonky. And then this is bound to the 3' end. And so this is the 5' end of this strand. And so you can see that the top is here, the bottom is here. But on this one, the top is here and the bottom is here. So they're opposite of each other. And so this is what the ladder looks like. So if you straighten out this DNA ladder, it looks like this. Okay? And one nucleotide represents this here, half of the ladder rung and part of this backbone. This backbone here represents the phosphate group and the sugar, and these rungs on the ladder represent just the nitrogenous bases. And there's 2 nitrogenous bases for each ladder rung. So there's 2 nucleotides there. And so here's a 3rd nucleotide, here's the 4th, here's the 5th, and here's the 6th, okay? Just like we drew here, we have 6 nucleotides making up a tiny section of DNA. So that's DNA. A second nitrogen or a nucleic acid that I want to introduce to you today is RNA. And maybe you've heard of RNA before, maybe you haven't. So I'm going to use blue. We're going to talk about RNA now. RNA stands for ribose nucleic acid. ribonucleic acid. And RNA, just like in DNA, just like all nucleic acids, are made of monomers, which are called nucleotides. So we have an RNA nucleotide. RNA nucleotides are what the polymer RNA is made of. And RNA nucleotides have 3 parts. Have 3 parts, just like the DNA nucleotide. The first part, same as the DNA, it's a phosphate group. Okay, and just like I did with the DNA, as I write the list, I'm going to draw the picture. So the phosphate group is similar. It's exactly the same, actually. So it's phosphorus with oxygens and hydrogens attached to it. For our sake, our notes, we're just going to draw a P with a circle around it. Okay, that's going to represent a phosphate group. Then the second part of the RNA nucleotide is the sugar, just like in DNA. However, the sugar is different. It is called a ribose sugar. Okay, and it looks very similar to the deoxyribose. And so I'm going to draw it here, and then I'm going to show you an actual picture of it. Okay, so here I'm going to draw it. It is also attached to the 5th carbon in the sugar. So here is the 5th carbon. This right here is the 5th carbon. And then it looks the same. It's like this little house with an oxygen at the top. And that's a ribose sugar. But I'm going to show you a picture from the book so you can see exactly what the difference is. Okay, so here's a picture from the textbook. I'm going to put it down here. I'll just put it, I'll put it here. Okay. And so I want to point out that these 2 sugars look almost identical. So here is the 5th carbon in both of them. And then we have a carbon here, a carbon here, a carbon here, a carbon here. The only difference is that there is an extra oxygen here on ribose. And then there's a missing oxygen in the deoxyribose. So if you think about the name, deoxy means without oxygen. D means to get rid of, and oxy means oxygen. So deoxyribose means it's a ribose missing an oxygen. So here's the ribose sugar, and here's the deoxyribose sugar. So it's without one oxygen, which is here. Okay, so you don't have to know the details of that, but I just wanted to show you. Okay. The third part of the RNA nucleotide is the nitrogenous base. And similarly to DNA, it has 4 options. 3 of the options are the same, but 1 of the options are different. So we still have A for adenine. We still have C for cytosine. We still have G for guanine. But now instead of having T, we have a U, and that stands for uracil. Uracil. And uracil and thymine look very similar, but they're not the same. And so whenever you have an RNA, you will see a bunch of U's in there. And then when you have DNA, you'll see a bunch of T's in there. And that is how you will be able to determine whether you have RNA or DNA. And that's also how the cell can determine whether it's DNA or RNA. And so the nitrogenous base is always attached to the 1st carbon in the ribose sugar. And so I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to put a U for the nitrogenous base for the example. Okay, and so similarly to the RNA, to the DNA nucleotide, the top is a 5' and the bottom is a 3'. And that's because this is the 3rd carbon and this is the 5th carbon. So that's where those names come from. But what is different between RNA and DNA is that RNA is not double-stranded the way DNA is. It is single-stranded. So I'm going to write that down. RNA is single-stranded. unlike DNA. So instead of having the ladder that has two sides, you just have a single-sided ladder. So let me just draw that. So it'll look like this. So here's our single-sided ladder. And you only have half of the rungs on there. Where the DNA, you have the full ladder with the whole rung. So just half like this. Okay. So that's what RNA looks like. And so similar to the DNA, each nucleotide gets added on to another nucleotide, and then you can make a long string of nucleotides, and you only have one half, which makes RNA. But if you have two strands, then that's DNA. Okay, so that's all I have for today, and I will see you at the next video. Bye-bye.